My name's Quan Huynh. I am the executive director for Defy Ventures out here in Southern California. Um, as Adam mentioned, yes, I am formerly incarcerated. I've done a total of 22 years of my life in and out of correctional institutions. First went in at 17 and began a long path of going in and out, and then ultimately went to prison for murder up in back in 1999. I was tried for the death penalty. Was found guilty of second-degree murder. It's only because I lied at trial, coached witnesses, and basically got rid of evidence that I was given a second-degree murder conviction. At the time, was 15 years to life. But in California, that basically meant a death sentence because California had not paroled one single life-term prisoner since 1977. So when I went in up with the life sentence, I thought I'm just going to die in here. Of course, so I just lived the way I wanted to live. I thought I was just going to be comfortable however I want to live. But I would say about 10, 12 years into my sentence, several things had happened. My younger brother had a daughter, and I saw her picture for the first time, and it was just a spitting image of my brother, just as a little girl. It just took me back to my childhood. Like, what happened here? How did my life end up like this? And maybe if I just backtrack just a little bit, I'm of Vietnamese descent. Came over here to the United States as a toddler, only several months old after we lost our country from the Vietnam War, and we settled, of all places, in Provo, Utah. Because my father had come to the U.S. before and knew the landscape here in the U.S. My mother had never seen snow, so my father decided, well, let's go to a place that has snow, and we settled in Provo, Utah, which for the most part was a great place. But I did experience what I do know now to be racism. Especially after the Vietnam War. So just growing up, there was always that sense of not really fitting in. I remember like going to school and all the kids looked, blonde hair, blue eye, or all white, and I'm the only Vietnamese kid in school. Our family's the only Vietnamese people probably in the whole state for many years. And just growing up thinking, why can't I just look normal like these other kids? Not really understanding my culture and all that. There was one incident in particular as a little boy that really stuck out in my mind. My younger brother and I were in the ditches playing with our G.I. Joe action figures, and some older kids and what looked to be like adults, probably like I didn't know if they're uncles or their fathers, but these kids were throwing rocks down at us and told us, get out of our country, you guys don't belong here, get out of the streams. And I was like 7, 8 years old. My brother was 6, and being little kids and thinking that they were so far away and the fence was so high, we felt brave. We told them, come and make us. Well, of course, those kids jumped the fence and they began to chase us down. We ran up the other side, and those kids caught up to us. I dropped some of my action figures. My brother turned to face them, and one of the kids punched my brother. He fell down, and they began to shove dirt in his mouth. I stood there like in fear. I didn't know what to do, and me and my brother walked home after that, both of us crying. When my father found out, he looked at me in that gentle way of his, but just like, how did you let this happen to your younger brother? How did you let this happen to your family? You're supposed to protect your family. So I felt so ashamed. I felt like I let my father down, my family down, my brother down. And that's where I think the first seed was planted for me, that I always have to protect my family. And that's how me and my brother grew up. We always protected each other, regardless. Like, I remember my brother would go into this rage when somebody would say something racist to us. So we just carried that chip throughout our life. My father got diagnosed with leukemia later that year, and that's when we moved out to Cali because he had family out here. He wanted to be closer to his family before he passed away, and he was able to survive leukemia for about 4 years. So he ended up passing away when I was 13, right before I went into high school, and that's basically where my brother and I, we just rebelled against my mom. And within a few years, I was already arrested for the first time. So that's how my path into juvenile hall and into the criminal justice system began. And then later on with my life sentence, it took like 12 years that before I even began to question myself, like, how did this end up here? Getting my brother's picture for the first time. One of the other things that I've always been is a bookworm. So that's how I got my escape in prison. I've read books, but I had this habit of when I read a book, I go on these rabbit trails. I go on the back page of the acknowledgments. I see what other books influenced this author, or what other books helped shape this story, or whatever. And then I get fascinated. And it was around that time I was reading a bunch of books on like entrepreneurship, business, which then going down rabbit trails, I became fascinated somehow with the stories of the saints, in particularly saints that had failed in their lives, and yet how did they go on to build these huge legacies? And of course, that got me down another rabbit trail on books on mindfulness and personal development. And this all became this perfect storm in my head, I would have to say, where one day it was on the prison yard. I was standing there early morning, and then I remember asking myself, like, why do I have to view prison as punishment? Why can't I make myself a better person, even if I'm supposed to die in here? And of course, the answer comes back from the universe, like, you can. And I remember that morning very well because the sun was barely coming up over the hills. I could feel the warmth from it. In the individual blades of grass, I could see the dew. And up above me in the razor wire, I heard a sparrow chirping. And I tell everyone, the sparrows had probably been chirping my whole prison term, but I had not heard it. But that day I heard it. That day I saw the sparrow in the razor wire. And I would say it was from that day forth that I began my process of transformation. Like, I saw the men on the yard as, like, many of them much further along in their journey. Some of them perhaps not even awakened yet. But I looked at this as a place, like, this is a way that I could connect with other human beings. And this is a way that I can practice everything that I want to become. And what better place to practice than this place where I'm basically removed from the world, but I could trying to practice mindfulness, speaking gently to others, nonviolent communication, treating others with dignity and respect. And I remember I got in this process of beginning to journal, and each night re-examining, like, where did I fail today? Failure not in the sense of, like, okay, I failed and it's over, but where would I like to improve for tomorrow? Almost like what Adam was talking about earlier, like looking for a way to continue to embrace failure and pivot and change. That's where it began for me there. Then I also realized I never properly grieved my father. So I had checked in with the therapist, which of course in the California prison systems is looked down upon, like somehow somebody is weak. But I felt this need, like I want to begin grieving my father's death. And getting involved with therapy, also being the consummate bookworm, I got really fascinated with the grief and loss process, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's model. And I read all her books, and that got me into other books. And then that made me realize the men around me were also grieving, whether it's men that had lost family members over the years, men that had lost their partners or wives because they've been incarcerated for so long, men that had lost friendships because they were uprooted from one prison that they've been living at for years, and now they're thrown into a new environment, a new prison, and there's no way for them to say, you know what, I missed my friend or I missed my bunkie that I lived with for 5-6 years, and now I'm here somewhere else. So I saw this huge need. So I put together a curriculum and I submitted it to the prison psychologist. The psychologist loved it, and we actually created the prison's first ever grief and loss group. When I saw the impact I was able to make there, that is when this new lens, like this new way of thinking, like how else can I make an impact? And that is where my mindset began of how do I bridge this gap in here of becoming a better person. So from there, I helped create a victims awareness group. We got involved with nonviolent communication groups. Like I either started or got involved with a whole bunch of different groups, and that became my way of basically giving back on the prison yard. Then the next thing I know, it's like 5 years later, I go to the parole board, and by that time, like I remember I had the guys on the yard thought I was crazy because I said, oh, when I go in, I'm gonna let them know that I lied on trial. I'm gonna let them know. I'm gonna tell them the absolute truth that I was guilty of first-degree murder. I intended to kill everybody that was in that car. People thought I was crazy, but then for me, it was more about ownership. I had this amazing sense of freedom inside because of just taking personal responsibility in every single one of my choices every single day. So I stepped into the parole board, told them the whole truth, gave them everything they wanted to hear. Also shared with them probably a lot of things they didn't want to hear, and they found me suitable. That was November of 2015 that I stepped out of prison. I was involved with Defy Ventures inside the prison as an entrepreneur in training. They call it EIT for short. So I was already involved with them. I came home, created my first company 6 months after that, a commercial cleaning company, still running to this day. I was telling Adam earlier, I have 6 employees. 4 of them are also formerly incarcerated. And I think Adam referred to, I met Adam at Pelican Bay, I think that was 2017. I remember because that was my first time going back into Pelican Bay. It was also during my birthday. So it's 2017, 2018, right around there. Then I helped my family launch a restaurant. After that, the restaurant is still running, is still successful. Defy Ventures expanded out here to Southern California. At the time, I was working in real estate and working at the family restaurant, but I felt like, man, I'm not doing enough. I'm not making enough impact here. And when I found out Defy Ventures was coming out here to Southern California, I jumped on board as the post-release program manager. And over the years, my roles and responsibilities have just grown. And today I work as the executive director out here, overseeing our program delivery for the largest chapter nationally. We're currently in 7 prisons, 4 transitional homes. I oversee our entire post-release program for the men and women that come home. Then also oversee our entrepreneurship pathway for the men and women that have come home and are now interested in building a business. During COVID, I had my book Sparrow in the Razor Wire was published, and on the first week of launch, it did hit Amazon bestseller status. So I was very fortunate to have quite a bit of people support to help get into bestseller status. I've also been able to donate 2,800 books into prison through different organizations and everything. So I tell people around me, like, those are probably the best letters I get are the ones that I receive from men or women that have read my book in prison. So maybe I'll pause there and maybe questions or I don't know where Adam or Rick, you want to go with this next?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Quan, thank you so much for just sharing a very short synopsis. But again, all of you, as Adam has mentioned, has his book. So please feel free to read and hear a little bit more about his story that he wasn't able to share in the time that he had allotted. So thank you again so much for sharing that piece. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. I'm going to bring Adam back up, who's going to just have some questions for you, Quan, and just be able to share and be able to, all those who are joining with us. And then we're going to close it out after with you both once you're done. So thank you again, Quan. I appreciate you. Adam is coming up next.
Quan, thank you. That was great. What was let's just get right into the questions. What was the hardest part? Two-part question. What was the hardest part about you starting your own business when you got out? And then what was the hardest aspect of your life when you were released?
I love both great questions. The hardest part about the business, I think for me it was listening to my inner voice, even though people around me told me like I'm doing it wrong. A specific example is when I got the first contract. A family member had said like one of my family members found out that I was hiring somebody to right away. Like, yeah, I got the contract and I'm putting somebody in, and my family member said like, why aren't you the one doing the cleaning? You're supposed to understand everything. And to me, it didn't make sense. I was like, wait, I don't think I have to be the best janitor to have a janitorial company. I should hire the best janitors. And that was, so there was a lot like, that I think pricing my contracts out correctly, that was also challenging, figuring out like how to negotiate that part and just learning as I'm going, like, okay, I made a mistake here. What can I do for next time? And continuing to go back and iterate from each of the mistakes that I knew I was making. And I think not getting down on myself when I know I'm making mistakes, like being more forgiving. I think those were also challenging, but I think a lot of the Defy curriculum and just a lot of the community that I had in my support network, I was able to talk a lot of it through. Personally, the hardest part for me, or the hardest thing to adjust, was just rebuilding relationships with family. I see it over and over, even at Defy as my work as post-release when men and women first come home, and the pattern happens over and over. I think my family saw me as one way when I went in, like this young knucklehead gangbanger, and then I came home and the way I communicate was different. The way I drew my boundaries where I'm more assertive. I speak up for things I agree with. I don't agree to things that I don't want to do. And so I think there was that disconnect, and just rebuilding those relationships.
Yeah, families usually, it's not always the toughest one, but it's the hardest one mentally.
Yeah.
Because we're emotionally connected to our family. So it's like, this is kind of the same thing with people in like recovery or addiction. Like the last person that I'm going to be able to help, from a sponsorship point of view, is my kids, because I hold them to a high standard and I'm emotionally connected to them. I love them. It's really easy for me to get upset, right? But then if I sponsor a guy I'm not related to, they could literally do all the same things that my son is doing, and it doesn't affect me. You know what I mean? I just want to be helpful, right? So yeah, family's tough. Tell us a little more about the book on. I love the title, by the way. Tell us more? Is it? Because I think you talked about it a little bit. I might have gapped out. Is it an autobiography, or can you give us a little more snippet of what the book is about?
It's a memoir. It's written for men that are doing long or life-term sentences, and in it I share how I came to my own sense of freedom years before I paroled from my life sentence. the way I wrote it, I began the beginning of each chapter with my actual transcripts from my board hearing. So these are the actual transcripts, which in California, the culture in California prisons, um, men don't share their transcripts. So it's like nobody asks to look at the transcripts. This is like somebody's personal paperwork. But during my time in prison, there was a man that had actually shared with me one day his transcripts. He had like 6 of them. And when I opened them for the first time and read it, it made me realize what he said happened in the parole hearing and what actually happened in the parole hearing from what I'm reading were 2 totally different things. And that made me also realize like the human condition of how we can spin the narrative, or there's this script that someone can tell themselves in their head that's not entirely accurate with reality. And that made me want to examine like what's the narrative that I'm telling myself that is not connected to reality. And I started examining that. So that's part of the reason why I think when I realized, you know what, when I was writing the book and I had to keep on going back to referring to my transcripts, and instead of saying commissioner did this and this, I go, wait, why don't I just ground it in this part of my actual transcripts? And that also is a form of the truth, because this is actually what was said, and then I could spin my story out from there. So it made the story move a lot more. So that was
So you're the executive director of Defy in California, or is it
Southern California?
Southern California. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what. So you got your own business. You're writing a book. You helped start a restaurant. You're the executive director at Defy Ventures in Southern California now. What does a normal day look like for you?
I think that's the exciting thing, that no day is ever the same. I mean, broadly speaking, it's from a 50,000 foot view. There's the one-on-ones with my direct reports, dealing with some of the prison staff, like the wardens and things, about programs that we're launching, dealing with our development team about building our structure or sustainability of the organization, meetings with potential donors, meetings with my advisory board down here. The day-to-day is just lots of driving. Sometimes it's funny because in Southern California, I'll drive to a meeting with a donor or an advisory board member. It takes me an hour and a half to get to them, and then it'll be 20-30 minute coffee meeting, and then it's an hour and a half to drive back. So, and that chops up half the day. So there are days like that, or days that I go into the prison, which are the most exciting, but also the most exhausting, is stepping into the prison, seeing the men or women that are just hungry for programming, and getting the officers around them to realize, like, for example, we just relaunched our program into this prison in Southern California called Tehachapi. It's a level 4 prison, which is a maximum security. And when we were trying to launch there, the warden wanted us to go to the level 4 yard. He said, this is my most active yard, active in terms of most violent yard. And he goes, I want you guys' program here. And when we started our first event there, a lot of the officers were very skeptical. They said these guys only signed up because they want to get out of the cell to do a hit on somebody. You can't have all these men in there at the same time. They're just going to stab each other. Like, I think just viewing them as like rabid animals. And for me, it was like, I told our team, like, hey, let's sit in, because they told us certain ways. They said, oh, well, we don't have chairs, so we'll make them sit on the ground. You guys stand up over them. And I reinforced to the team. I said, no, if you guys are comfortable, please, let's sit amongst them. Let's get them in a circle. Let's treat them with dignity, respect, and human beings. So that's what we did. And I remember at the end of that day, the men were up laughing, dancing, talking to each other across racial lines. And there was the public information officer and the community resource manager. I think they were just totally surprised And I remember I walked up to her and I said, look at these men. These are men that you thought would never want the program. Would you ever thought they would be doing something like this? And she just shook her head. She's just like, no, not in a million years. But I think that for me, it just reinforces like, I think inherently human beings, even someone that's incarcerated, just wants to be treated with just as a human being instead of just looked down upon or just called an inmate. And I mean, I imagine you know this too, Adam. So that it just reinforces it every time I get to go back into the prisons.
Yeah. Let's so when you're going into, are you helping out with the curriculum? Are you teaching, or have you moved into a role where you're more administration?
It's more administration. I mean, I'm very familiar with the curriculum because I went through the curriculum. It's a 1,200-page curriculum. And our program is 6 months. It used to be run longer. It's streamlined now. And I was also familiar with facilitating the curriculum because there was a time when I was the entrepreneurship manager. So I was also delivering our program virtually. But now I'm removed from that. Not that I'm adverse to. I mean, recently, about a month ago, I went in and facilitated a group because at a transitional home because our facilitator had COVID and the backup person was on vacation. So I said, oh, cool. Here's my chance to go back in and hang out with the guys. So yeah, I went in to facilitate also.
Yeah, I always look forward to, when people can't, make their commitments because life happens or whatever. And then I, on a random Sunday night, get to go lead a group session in the jail or whatever. It gets me back to doing back to the basics.
Yeah. It's tiring, but it's so worth it, right? When you walk out, like, man, this was I'm so tired, but it was so worth it.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's kind of like for me, like going to AA meetings. Like, there's sometimes I just don't want to go, and then I get there, and it just like jump starts my life again. And I've never left a group session or a meeting where I'm like, that was ridiculous. Like it's always turned out good. Let's answer this last question, then Ricky, come back on in the meantime. Quan, tell us about an experience with someone who came through your program that's kicking ass today.
Wow, I so many. Where do I share their success?
One of your top 5 or top 3, just off the top of your head.
Okay, one of my favorite. Her name's Blanca. She lost her grandmother while incarcerated, and she said she wished that she had asked her grandma this. She wished she had asked her grandma that. She was like, this was like the she was like the matriarch of the family, and she was the main one that kept everybody together. And so Blanca like really missed like those conversations with her grandma. So she said she was very intentional about making time to spend and ask questions of her son, but she wished her son also asked questions. So she joined our program and came up with her business, Caleb's Cookies and Treats. And in it, I'm saying all she does, what her business is she does pre-made cookie or baking ingredients, sends it to, she sells that, but in it, then she also includes conversation cards. And these are conversation cards for the adult and their young helper to ask each other questions to build the bond. And her whole business is built around that. I love that. There's a guy that went through our program that was in, his name's Gio. He was going through, and he was already working at a union job, I think he's making like 40 something an hour. The kid has skills on doing construction work. Going through our program, suddenly he says, you know what, I think I have the understanding and also the courage now to pursue walking off and building my own business. And that's exactly what he did, doing fantastic. I think he's generating something like 20, 30K a year. So, I mean, those are, I guess, great sounding success stories, especially if it's with the amount of money he's generating. But then there's also people like, let me see who else, because we have success stories where even if they don't go on to create a business, They said, okay, entrepreneurship is not for me. Same thing, that because at Defy we believe it's just the lens of entrepreneurship, lessons of pivoting, resiliency, grit, thinking like a boss is where you could contribute. One of our guys came home, interviewed for several jobs. I remember he used to text me, I got shot down at 5 different interviews. I'm putting in for the next 5 next week. Like, he was just on it. Like, and it was something that we teach at Defy, like, what are your asks and how is it? He finally landed a job at Amazon as a tech 3 or something. And he says it was only because one night after one of our meetings or virtual meetings, he felt so pumped up because he said this, Amazon has sent him this test and said you have to test, and he was so afraid of failing. And I think one of our topics that night was like embracing failure. What's the worst that's going to happen? And he said his wife was gone that night. He was still so pumped up after the meeting. He put in the test. Amazon called him back. They offered him a job. His record came up. He spoke about his record. I think he's making 6 figures now. So yeah, those are just a few. I mean, there's so many amazing men and women that go through our program.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, in the story that I shared earlier about the individual that was still in prison and then making the move out of the shoe and then seeing his daughter, like Ricky and I did a short 6-week entrepreneur course for participants in F5 a couple of years ago. And we've had 3 businesses start because of it. And there was I think we only had 8 people in the class.
Yeah.
One of them was Dan Coleman, Dakota Property Services. And now he does like lawn care, landscaping. He's doing Christmas lights. And he got voted in the region premier landscaper on a vote by the people of Fargo, between landscaping companies that have been around for 25 years. So like it's not just like the work they do, but like we test our guys while they're going through the curriculum because we're out, we can do this. And so I walked out of the classroom and I called Dan on his business cell phone while he was in class because I wanted to see if he would get up in the middle of class and go answer the phone after normal business hours, right? And he got up and he walked out and he was like, "Hi, this is Dan, Dakota Property Services. How can I help you? How can I assist you?" And I was like, "Yeah, my name's Bob."
And mind you, we're all watching this happen. We're seeing Adam on the phone calling, and Dan's like coming out of the class, and it was great.
He was the only one that didn't know. And then he turned around and he saw me talking to him. He's like, and I was like, listen, like that's the type of tenacity that you need as an entrepreneur, as a startup. You got to be able to differentiate yourself from everyone else. The other landscaping companies aren't answering the phone after 5 o'clock. Just extend it out to 7, right? And see what happens. There might be calls when people are getting off of work and they come home, they see their house and they're like, God damn it, I need some work done, and it's 5 o'clock and no one's answering the phone, right? Like that type of mindset on business. You come home and you see your kids or whatever, and then instead of doing the 2 hours like waiting by the phone to see if someone calls, put the phone down and spend 2 hours with them. You know what I mean? Like it's just embracing the fear and the failure that goes along with entrepreneurship. I failed 99 times before I started F5. Right. And now I've started 2 businesses and I'm batting, 1,000% on successful companies that I've started in the last 5 years. And so that is tattered with a journey of failure up to that point. So, Quan, I appreciate you coming on. We're going to find out how many people didn't get books or whatever, and I'll communicate with you and we'll get some more books if we need. Is there anything final you want to say before we let you go?
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me share the story, and thank you for gifting the men here with the books.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you for being in our orbit and being who you are and doing what you do. We're big fans of Defy Ventures. I heard you say that you guys implemented a curriculum into sober living places or halfway houses. I would be interested in whoever the contact person is having a conversation, since we have 7 houses I would love to see what that looks like on. I know what it looks like in prison. I'd love to see what it looks like on the outside. So
Okay. I'll
Cool.
follow up you on offline on that one. Yeah.
cool. Thank you.